The first sculpting process we're going to talk about is using the brushes located in the brush palette. These can be found by either clicking up here on the actual brush icon or just hitting B on your keyboard. Now you can see there's quite a wide range of brushes in which you can choose from to actually start pushing and pulling details on your model. Now we're going to cover a few of these brushes, some of the ones that are more popular among artists, to kind of add a little more detail and rough out these shapes to match our reference a little bit better. So on my screen here you can see I have my reference images loaded as visual reference through Spotlight sitting over here on my canvas. I also have my model here with the actual helmet structure here that was generated using the procedural process of panel loops. If I come over here to my second subtool on my list, you can see this is my actual base mesh that was generated from the scan data. I've gone through and using the select lasso brush just generated polygrouping in certain areas to kind of mimic the large forms on that helmet. Those polygroups were then turned into panel loops, which gave me this nice kind of procedural edge border and panel across the entire surface of the model here. I then used the move brush along with the brush auto masking, mask by polygroups, and I went through and just started pushing and pulling the areas of the model here to generate and obtain some of the kind of elements that match the reference a little bit better. So just literally just moving those areas of the model through that polygroup masking to generate the shape and form. So after a few minutes of doing that, I ended up with a structure of the actual helmet that matches a little more closely to the reference on screen here. Now this isn't perfect at the moment, so there's still a lot of details that need to come in and clean up, and this is where we're going to come through and just kind of start sculpting on our model with those sculpting brushes inside of ZBrush. To start off, before we go into the actual sculpting, I want to briefly cover how the brush menu works with hotkeys. So if you hit B on your keyboard, that automatically brings up the brush palette here. And once you have this up, you'll notice there's a bar on the top here that kind of has these like letters all the way down. So it has A through Z on the top. Well, after you first hit that B on your keyboard, you can then come through and hit a second key on your keyboard to isolate by a letter. So I know clay buildup starts with the letter C. So if I hit B, which opens my brush palette here, then hit the letter C, it's going to isolate all those brushes that begin with letter C. And then after you have those two buttons pressed, you can then introduce a third press, which is going to use this little letter that's next to all the brushes. So you can see here, here's the clay buildup brush here, and the letter next to it is B. So if I hit B on my keyboard, isolate by letter C, and then hit B, it's going to automatically give me that clay buildup brush. Now the process of how these letters are assigned is automatic, so if you load any new brushes in, these could possibly change, but ZBrush tries to come through and assign letters that associate with letters that are actually in the name of the brush. So clay buildup has a B in it, so it's automatically going to assign a B as that third button to press to select that brush. If I wanted to select the standard brush, which is the default brush that loads when you start ZBrush, just hit B on your keyboard, isolate by letter S, and then you'll notice that the standard brush has letter T next to it. So BST is the hotkey for that brush. So quick go back to clay buildup, BCB, and I have clay buildup loaded, and then if I need to go back to that standard brush, BST, and now I have standard loaded. So it's a very quick way to go through and kind of navigate the brushes inside of ZBrush without needing to open this up and manually find and select the brush. And once you have that kind of letter kind of associated or ingrained in your brain, you can just kind of go through and sculpt and just quickly shift through the brushes very fast as you sculpt on your model. So now I'm going to go back to that clay buildup brush, so BCB, and I'm just going to change my draw size. It's just holding spacebar to bring up this menu, and then you come in and change your draw size by simply just scaling it here. You can also hold S, which will give you that draw size function as well, or navigate up to the top here and change it there. So now that I have clay buildup loaded, I can start sculpting on this. One thing you will notice is that I'm still locked into that mask by polygroup mode, so you want to come over to your brush menu here and turn this back down to 0. You'll also notice that the panel loops that I actually generated, the topology is kind of skewing in certain areas. So I get pretty good amount of detail here, and then as soon as I hit this part there, I really don't have enough detail to actually sculpt in that area. So I'm not going to be able to add any detail in this part because I really just don't have enough topology resolution to support any details I want to sculpt in. So I need to take this mesh and first turn it into a Dynamesh, which is going to give me all these kind of parts, a little more topology to actually sculpt on. Well, right now I have all these things set up in multiple poly groups all the way through there. So if I start holding Control and Shift and selecting on these areas, you can see it's going to leave me like little strips of geometry all over the place. So I want to go through and first auto group this based on the actual islands of topology across the model. So I'm going to come over here to my tool palette and scroll all the way down to the bottom here and locate the polygroup area. Under here I'm just going to click auto groups, and that's going to go through and assign a polygroup to every single chunk of the model. So now if I come through and select this portion here, it's going to give me that whole part. If I come and select this part here, it's going to give me this whole part. So now I have a nice area of smaller kind of grouped pieces that I can actually come in and kind of isolate and sculpt on individually. So after I have that done, I'm going to turn off my polyframes here, and I'm going to come to the Geometry tab, and I'm going to turn this into a Dynamesh. So just locating the Dynamesh subpalette over here, set my resolution to something around 256, make sure blur is at 0, and then turn on the group option here. Now, since these are all separated out into these individual polygroups, if I did not have this group option turned on, it would give me one single kind of watertight mesh. And I still want these pieces to be individual elements, so I can split them into subtools and kind of refine them a little bit more. So I'm going to make sure I have that group button turned on. So after you have that, just come over here and click Dynamesh. So now you can see I have an even distribution of polygons across all those elements on the model, and there's still individual parts. So if I Control Shift click on one, I'm going to get that model visible on my canvas. So now I want to take all those groups that we kind of have individually set up on our model here and split them off into multiple subtools. Because right now, actually working on this guy, I could sculpt on him perfectly fine, and then if I wanted to isolate a piece, I could hold Control Shift. But when you start getting to areas where you want to just start masking stuff out and flipping it and inverting it, it can take a little while to kind of get these parts kind of isolated to an area where you can actually just focus on that piece. So what I usually like doing at this stage is taking actual, the polygroups of this model and splitting them into new subtools. So this process is very easy. So if I scroll up here to the subtool palette here and then locate the subpalette of split and open that up, there's this button here called Group Split. Now this Group Split button is an undoable operation, so that means after you press it, you're not just going to be able to hit Control Z to get your model back to this stage. So it's usually a good thing to note to kind of save your file at this point. You can merge the pieces together after they have been split. So if you hit this button and you didn't save and then you really want your model to be all back together, you can merge them back together with this merge subpalette over here. But in general, saving is usually the easiest practice rather than coming through and merging all those parts together again. So with that part selected, with the poly grouping set up, I'm just going to come over here and hit Group Split. And then it's going to tell you, this is an undoable operation, so I'm just going to hit OK. And now you can see it's actually gone through and split all those polygroups that were on that subtool into individual subtools. So now you can see I have all those individual pieces and they're their own subtools. So I'm just going to come through quick and turn on these individual parts so you can just see them all together as a whole. And another nice thing about having these kind of parts in their own separate subtools now is that you can easily navigate visually through these subtools by just holding Alt and clicking on the individual subtool, and this is going to allow you to quickly kind of select those parts. So instead of doing that Control Shift to hide or show visible or doing masking to isolate a section, you can just hold Alt and click and it's going to hop right to that subtool. So if I want to sculpt on this kind of mandible here, I just got sculpt here, but then if I want to come over and jump on the visor, just hold Alt and click and I can start working on the visor. So another kind of interesting and really powerful functionality if you're working with a lot of subtools in your scene. So now that I have my file set up, we can actually now start sculpting and fleshing out some of these forms a little bit more. So the first brush we're going to talk about is clay buildup. So opening your brush menu with B, isolating by letter C, and then hitting B again for clay buildup. So clay buildup is one of my go-to brushes for a lot of kind of sculpting stuff. It does a really nice job of actually pushing and pulling the surfaces without causing a lot of distortion. So on the visor here, you can see I have it, kind of tapering to the side here. So I'm just going to come through and actually start pulling some of the form out on the side here, and then going in with shift and just kind of smoothing it down some. So just trying to establish a little more of that visor's kind of shape, so it has that rough kind of flat bottom. So just going through and sculpting quickly with clay buildup here. Now clay buildup is also nice because as you stroke, it's actually going to build up, so it's going to keep building that surface up. So this gives you, kind of a really nice kind of almost rakish type quality to the brush to allow you to come in and build these forms up in large sections. So I use this quite a bit and just kind of going through and establishing, planes and area on my model as I'm sculpting. So if I want this to be, kind of flat through this area, so I want almost like a lip up here and then have some sort of flush sides to kind of match this tapered angle right there, and come through and just kind of describe those really quick with clay buildup, and just using Alt to do a negative carve and then releasing Alt to do a positive carve. Then I'll come in with just holding Shift to just kind of smooth areas out as well, but just kind of looking at the form of the model and just kind of going that route. Now the next brush I want to hit on is the actual H polish brush, and this is another one of my favorites. So I'm going to open up the brush menu again, isolate by the letter H, and that's automatically going to give you H polish. So if we go back to the brush menu and just open up one more time, you can see there's not a lot of brushes with H. There's actually just one, so you only need a 2-button combination to actually get to H polish. So B and H will give you H polish. Now if you had multiple brushes in here with H after them, then you'd actually have to start using that third brush letter. But as H polish is the only brush inside of ZBrush right now that begins with the letter H, I can just hit B and H, and that will give me H polish as my selected brush. So H polish does a really nice kind of polish feature. It'll kind of take the surface from where you start and then flatten out along that. So you can come in and kind of describe angles really quickly with this, and it's extremely pressure sensitive, so you can come in and just kind of hit certain parts of the model and just kind of flatten areas out as you go. So my general process for doing a lot of this kind of stuff is I'll go in with clay buildup to build up the area, and then come in with H polish to kind of flatten the surface out. H polish also has a negative function as well, so the positive does, without holding Alt, you just kind of get this kind of flatten effect. So I usually do that with a large brush size, and that's going to allow me to get a really strong form. And then I'll go back in with a smaller brush size of H polish and hold Alt and kind of go back in and bump up the backside area. So this is almost like a edge bumping effect, so you can come in and just kind of bump and then go back and forth. So this is stroking normally and then hitting Alt and kind of adding material, so adding and pushing it down, and you can kind of come through and get really kind of nice lines at any hard surface forms with this brush. Now this brush is a time-consuming brush, but it's very relaxing in my opinion, so I can pretty much just zone out and H polish for a few hours, and then it only feels like it's 10 minutes, but then I look at the clock and it's time to go home. So another brush that is really nice. You can totally hear my voice change when I actually start using H polish, because it's just such a relaxing brush in my opinion to use. So there's a few more brushes I kind of want to hit on, and actually when you start sculpting on the model here. Next brush is the pinch brush, so hitting B on your keyboard to bring up your brush menu, isolating by the letter P, and then if you come over here you can see the third letter in that combination is I for pinch. And the pinch brush actually will come through and actually start pulling your topology together. So if I turn on the polyframes here, you can see I have pretty even distribution of polygons still. So the H polish and the clay buildup don't really change that underlying structure too much. It literally just is conforming outwards from the surface. But now that I have this pinch brush selected, if I click and start dragging through that, you can start seeing the topology changes, right? So it's taking those areas of those polygons and it's pinching them together to give you a hard kind of crease or edge. Now sometimes you don't really want this on your model in a lot of places, but it can also help clean up areas where you just might need a little more tightness on certain parts. So if I come through and just pinch this part here, just taking the pinch brush and running it across, you can start to see I can get that edge a little more clearly defined. Now this mesh isn't really dense right now, so I can kind of come through and pinch it, and it's still going to give me that form, and just added that little extra sharpness to that edge there on the model. And if you're using Dynamesh as well, you can go through and pinch parts of your model all over the place, and then just re-Dynamesh, and that straight line or that actual function of that hard edge will stay. So it's a nice little brush to come through and pinch stuff out, and you can start getting really solid lines right out of there. So if I come over here and pinch this part too, you can start seeing clean up some of those areas where stuff might be a little bit wobbly or warped, and just coming through with pinch, and you can start getting those kind of harsh edges back onto the model. Another brush talk about really quick is the damn standard brush. So hitting B on the keyboard, isolating by the letter D, and then S is the third letter in that brush hotkey for damn standard. Now the damn standard brush has been a staple for a lot of people since it's been released, and this actually does a really nice kind of carve function to the surface of your model. It's basically like a carve pinch, so you can come through and just change to a small brush size and do these kind of carve functions on it. And this is really a great brush for generating panel lines, so you can come in and start actually putting panel lines in on your model. Now you probably want to subdivide this a little bit more if you're doing this at a higher level, so we're going to use damn standard quite a bit as we go on, and it's often used in combination with that pinch brush as well. So you cut in kind of a seam line like that with the damn standard brush, and then switch back to your pinch brush, and then you can come in and just kind of pinch that area together, and that's going to give you a really nice kind of hard edge in there. You can also come back in with H polish now too, and just come in and start flattening those areas out. So it's another brush that works really well with pinch, and you end up starting to get those kind of shapes established nicely. So there's one more brush I'm going to quickly talk about, and that is the standard brush. So the standard brush is the brush that loads by default when you start up ZBrush. To access it, I'm just going to hit BST, which will load it over here. Now I'm going to talk about this brush because it's very versatile, so it can be used in multiple ways. So by default, it just comes in as your normal kind of standard brush, like so. So it just can sculpt and push the surface. It basically gives you this kind of nice kind of round bevel to your model. So it can be helpful when coming in and adding certain elements or structure or form across the surface. What I like to do with standard is I actually like to use it as a panel line brush as well. So I'll first come up here and take this intensity and increase it quite a bit. I'll then change my draw size to something small to something around 3. And then I'll come up to the stroke palette here and make sure lazy mouse is turned on. I'll increase this lazy radius to 100, and then also increase the lazy smooth all the way to 16. So now this gives me this really kind of nice brush where if I hold Alt and draw, you can see it's going to actually start drawing in lines across the surface. Now my mesh right now doesn't really have enough density to kind of show you guys this, so I'm going to come over here to the Geometry tab and just divide once. And then now you should start seeing this kind of panel line being drawn out. And it does a really nice job of kind of giving you a unpinched kind of line of panel structure. And so I'll go through the model and actually kind of bump along certain edges like this, and with that large lazy mouse modifier on it, you can kind of get these lines really precise as you sculpt them. So I'll go through the entire surface. You'll see me do this in some of the other videos, and we actually define some of the structure a little bit more, where I'll come and hit those edges with this standard brush that's just really small to get really precise and clean panels. So it's a very interesting brush, and I use it quite a bit just for things like that. The other thing with standard brush is that it allows you to use alphas really well. So come over here and just click on this stroke option here and select direct rectangle. And now you have the option to use it as a drag stroke. So if I come over my model and drag out, you actually want to come up and turn lazy mouse off as well. You'll see right now that nothing's really happening. It's dragging out and it's kind of affecting the surface in this kind of like rounded type function. Well, you can apply an alpha to this brush. So if I come over here and just grab something like this, and now you can use the standard brush and start applying, different alpha surfaces to your model. So we're going to cover in a later video how to create some of these alphas quickly. But it's all using that same kind of standard brush, and so you can go through and add even more details with that brush. So the standard brush in general is very robust in the amount of stuff you can actually do with it, and I think it's one of the reasons why it loads by default when you start ZBrush. So that covers the basics of just using the actual brushes inside the brush menu, and we've covered a few of them to just kind of go through and add different kind of sculpting elements to your model. So I'm going to proceed and kind of we'll go through and just kind of sculpt all these details out to get to a rough shape where all these areas of where we had those panel loops generated have a little more form to kind of fit the concept art over here.